to that point, do we need sometimes, it's almost weird to say, but do we need these kind of rude awakenings or these kind of people in the world, like a Hitler, like a Stalin, to realize, well, in some ways, not to be a little too rah-rah about America, but um, that we're actually really lucky
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. And I think once, and I think the United States has shown that in many ways, right? So whenever we get attacked or somebody attacks our values, Americans are always wants to kind of step up and say, well, no, this is what we believe in.
Yeah.
And for temporary, for a brief moment, it seems that we're all in this together, and then we go back to our petty fighting.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's absolutely right. Churchill had a great line somewhere during the war. He said, the United States can always be counted on to do the right thing after it has exhausted every other possibility, which is maybe about right. But, I do think there is something to this. I think there's something about having a foil, in the sense there's something about having out there a regime which embodies absolutely what we don't want to be, absolutely what, as Americans, at least we imagine we don't want to be. Um, I really think that's important in actually kind of defining who we are. I think something like that happened during the Cold War too. You know, one of the things that scholars of America in the Cold War have pointed out is that there's this sort of relationship between the rise of the civil rights movement in the 50s and the Cold War, because um, even people who didn't really care about civil rights, like President Eisenhower, thought, it's a bad look if we have racial segregation when we're trying to hold ourselves up as the beacon of democracy against the dictatorship of the Soviet Union. So we better clean up our own house a little bit here. There was a lot of that, and I think it's part of that process of defining what it is that we want our democracy to be about. It kind of helps to have the adversary out there. I actually think probably that's a factor in the last 30 years since the Cold War ended. I think that probably has a bit to do with why we're seeing, nationalist political movements in democracies here, also in Britain, in Germany, elsewhere, because we don't have that foil in quite the same way since the Cold War has been over that we can define ourselves against.
yeah, I think after the end of the Cold War and after the Soviet Union fell, we had this, to quote Francis Fukuyama, almost a end of history
Yeah,
mentality where
right.
that's it, the bad guys are done,
Yeah,
our job here is done. We're gonna go on to figure out our own problems or
yeah,
whatever was the
yeah,
mindset. And you look out into the world now, and there are definitely clear cut. I don't like the language, but I would call them adversaries, or I don't want to call them enemies, but people that we don't want to emulate, or countries we don't want to emulate, and that's uh, maybe Russia, Turkey, China.
yeah.
Maybe there are a few others I'm gonna miss, but those are the three big ones. Why is that not having the same effect that well, obviously I'm not even going to mention the Hitler part, but
Right.
the effect that the Cold War had? Because if we all of a sudden declare tomorrow that we're in a Cold War, and in some ways we kind of are with China,
Mm-hmm.
um, people are not going to all of a sudden hate communists, right? Because that's not what we associate the Chinese with,
Especially now when they're really
especially now,
not.
right?
Yeah, as I was saying my last thing there, I was afraid you were going to ask me this question, and I mean that's a very good question, to which I'm not sure I know the answer, except that maybe I think those countries haven't taken shape yet as adversaries in the way that Hitler's Germany or the Soviet Union did. And they're certainly out there. They certainly seem, I hope to most of us, to be antithetical to our principles. I mean, the slight complication there is the odd relationship between the Trump Republicans and Russia in recent years. Um, I came across a picture a while back that I put on my Twitter feed of a couple guys at a Trump rally wearing T-shirts that says something like, "I'd rather be Russian than a Democrat," which, if you can imagine someone doing that during the Cold War and what the reaction of conservative Republicans would have been. I mean, my God, look how far we've come. You know, so there isn't a consensus in America right now, as there isn't a consensus on most things, but I think there isn't a consensus on who the adversary is, certainly not with respect to Russia, which is highly deserving of being an adversary of ours, in my view. So is China. So is Turkey. But I don't think any of those countries right now are looming on our radar screen, if you will, the way that the Nazis did, the way the Kaiser's Germany did, the way the Soviet Union did. You know, if they do in time, then maybe the silver lining in the cloud will be that we will redefine our democracy a little bit. I don't know.